Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience as we waited for the room to populate. We're really looking forward to this session where we're going to discuss our trends that we've seen in 2017 and the predictions for 2018 that we have across the OTT space, streaming industries, advertising brands, and really just some of the major players and what they've done in 2017 and how that will impact what we believe they're going to do in 2018. If you didn't get a chance to read up on the webinar documentation ahead of the call, we're going to give our panelists a chance to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their vantage point on the industry. I think we have a pretty diverse stable of experts here to really cover each one of those touch points. The run of show, just so that everyone is on the same page, after our introductions, the group and I are going to go through 3 core areas of the industry. We're going to talk about video business models first, then we're going to go through brands and advertising what we see happening on the media side, and then we'll talk about formats, which is actually going to cover vertical versus horizontal genres, and we'll also talk about different categories that we see going into 2018 as primary focus. And then we'll end on a rapid fire session where we're going to run down each one of the top 10 major companies that we're tracking and find interesting in the space and kind of run through what our quick high-level takeaways are on their activity from this year and going into 2018. So with that introduction, I'm going to start with you, Jamie, because you're just top of the clock for me in terms of the circle on our viewpoint here, and give you a minute to introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Peter and then to Colin.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Jess. I appreciate that. Hey, everyone. I'm Jamie Stenziano, head of Media Insights at Clarion Research. We conduct custom insight studies for media and entertainment companies across the ecosystem. So not surprisingly, in this conversation, I'm going to give a few thoughts on data measurement and how that's affecting the video space moving forward.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Csathy. I'm the chairman of Creative Media. We're a media tech-focused business advisory, development, and investment firm. I have a venture capital fund as well. Been in the media and entertainment space for a long time, both on the traditional side and also running a number of digital media companies, and track the space of multi-platform video really, really closely. Have some strong opinions and look forward to speaking with all of you guys about it.
Hey, Peter. Just like you, I've been in the industry too many years. Tracking both old and new media. I'm founder and chief analyst at Enscreen Media, which is a free resource to the industry. Please feel free to come and check out the news, opinions, and free white papers that are available at the website. New stuff every day. Yeah, my particular focus over the last 10 years has really been the OTT space, the development of online video delivery. And that's, I think, what we're going to be talking about a lot today, right, Jocelyn?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Jocelyn Johnson, the founder of VideoInk. For those of you who don't know, obviously we're a publication that covers the industry, and we're also working to really provide intel and insights for anyone who is working across this space in many of the category areas that we're going to talk about today and beyond. So without further ado, I definitely want to kick off this conversation. For those who are listening in, if you have any questions throughout the session, I will be monitoring those. You can either submit them in the questions section, or you can raise your hand, and I can directly message with you, and you can send something direct to me. So to get everything going, I mean, one trend that I saw for this year, and I think that was pretty obvious across the board, was this SVOD boom. Almost every single one of our articles starts with the fact that someone is launching a subscription streaming business, or that we're seeing them going out of business. What are you guys seeing, and I'll open this to whoever wants to chime in first, on the video business models of this year, and then we'll move into what's predicted for next year as well.
So certainly SVOD, the clamor for subscription video on demand services, has been pretty intense this year. We've seen a lot of launches. I'm not sure that we will continue to see launches at the paces that we have seen this year, next year. One of the problems, I think, is people are beginning to realize that there's only so many services that consumers will subscribe to, although there has been a trend towards multiple service signups among subscribers, there seem to be really limited to 2 or 3 at the moment. So that's a real problem. If you're one of the smaller providers, it's very difficult to get seen, it's very difficult to get found by your potential audience. And there's a lot that some of the companies are doing to try and help that, and we'll be talking about, I think, some of the other companies that are helping with that aggregation and that being found issue for SVOD providers. I think you know, with the biggest one, Netflix, we'll continue to see moderate growth in the US market, but really exploding growth coming in the next year in international markets. Companies really hitting the ground running with a lot of partnerships now in Europe and in other areas of the world that are really going to keep it growing very, very strongly internationally. And as I say, a little bit more modest growth here in the US.
So I'll chime in. I agree and disagree to a certain extent. First of all, I think we'd be remiss without talking about the deal, the mega deal that's happening right now and looks to be announced as early as tomorrow, and that's the Disney-Fox deal. And that's all about OTT. It's all about SVOD. It's all about getting great content into Disney's hands and expanding its content as well as its production capabilities in order to compete extremely effectively, as effectively as possible when it launches its own services. And also, by the way, let's not forget, takes over Hulu in the process if the deal gets approved, because Disney would have majority ownership of Hulu too, which makes it really interesting. So Joss, maybe we can talk about that a little bit later on too. But yeah. I think certainly on the, I agree with you, Colin, for sure, that when it comes to the macro players, those who are trying to cover it all and compete with Netflix, it is, you've had this growing list, and that list, like Disney's coming in, will grow, but the growth will slow because trying to get in against all these massive behemoths that are already out there blanketing the domestic market and then internationally as well is going to be very challenging. We're already seeing it. We're seeing it with like full screen that's kind of dropping out of the game. I think Fubo TV is going to have a challenging time, which makes it ripe for an acquisition. But then what the opportunity, this is where I slightly disagree. Where I see the opportunity being is really on those markets, those demographics that are underserved in the marketplace by those big players. And so those are what they call niche-focused, segment-focused audiences that are very passionate, passion-filled about something. So it could be like foodies and travel, so for Tastemade. It could be Asian pop culture, Asian East meets West, and then you have 88 Rising. So you have this growing list, and 88 Rising was new this past year. My fund actually invested in them. And you're going to, I don't see that type of an opportunity slowing down at all, especially in the global marketplace. There are so many underserved markets that haven't been claimed yet, although there's a plethora already out there. I think that will only continue, and the opportunity to be a hyper-focused player that monetizes in a very different way than they have historically, which means via community and commerce and not just content, I see that as being a very big win.
Yeah, I mean, I'll build on what Peter mentioned. I think it's really important to note that from the consumer trend side of the world, there is a big shift into interests and niches, to your point, that are deep as opposed to broad. So I think it's really well said to think to the future when we are trying to figure out how to optimize to audiences. I think there's a lot of interest right now in going deeper as opposed to broader as far as the actual content itself, and I think the consumption across platforms will follow that.
Yeah, there's an interesting stat that we tracked this year as part of our data bank from MarketWired that says the average consumer adoption of SVOD services is 10% in 2017 with an average ARPU of $7.41. I think that brings up an interesting issue that we've seen playing out is just how much disposable wallet share there really is from the consumer. And when you're looking at this sort of crux at the core of the argument that the cable industry is being brought down is the price and this threshold of friction that the consumer is experiencing on paying so much. Well, when you break that price down across the primaries, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, and maybe some of the key secondaries, Rooster Teeth or maybe Crunchyroll or maybe something like Tubi TV, which is another kind of hybrid model streaming platform, really that wallet share starts to get smaller and smaller, and the cable bill is almost comparable to what you're paying when you look at internet and then across those three services. So I think that's been a driver of the issue this year. And then, you know, going into next year, I think a couple of things that I've been looking at while we're on this like SVOD model conversation is really just what's going to happen with Vimeo. I mean, they've obviously doubled down on standing up infrastructure for creators and independent producers on this side, specifically going at the $2.99, $3.99, up to $7.99 price point, and other businesses in that same vein, like Zype, which have built a lot of infrastructure around standing up a streaming business or a hybrid business model. Just curious, I'll be tracking to see what happens with some of those companies in next year, and I would anticipate, similar to what you said, Peter, with Fubo looking for an exit, I would anticipate some of those guys look to find an exit to some of these businesses that operate multiple brands and maybe already want to stand up their own direct-to-consumer business themselves.
Yeah, I had Kathleen Barrett from Vimeo on a panel last Thursday at TV Tomorrow Show, and very clearly that, you know, they see their sweet spot as a smaller provider and helping get those up and operating as quickly as possible. She also sees a world of 10,000 niches, 10,000 channels. The problem in the immediate future for those services is reach, being found, and the size of the audience. You make a really good point, Jocelyn, that there's just so much that consumers are willing to part with at the moment from their wallet. Still, many people are committed to pay TV, and that's absorbing a lot of their disposable income for entertainment services. And as long as that's the case, the opportunity for for SVOD services will be very limited, I think, to in that $30, you know, sort of $30 range. Now that will change over time, but the problem is it won't change fast enough, I think, to sustain 10,000 channels. Now, that's not to say that there isn't an opportunity there for those channels. There is, but they may need to look to other opportunities other than just SVOD to be successful, I think.
Yeah, look, I have some pretty strong opinions about this one, where I think that certainly whether there's 10,000 channels, who knows what the right number is, and there's so much experimentation in terms of business models and what's going to work. But if you're a more segment-focused niche, looking to establish yourself in this marketplace as an OTT service provider, you do have a global opportunity potentially. So what your goal is as a business and as a service provider is to find a passionate audience and really own that audience. And by the way to do that is not thinking just as being a content purveyor, because one monetization path is certainly the subscription point or advertising, but I'll take Elation as an example. Elation has Crunchyroll and some of the others. What they're trying to do, and it's interesting, is they're really looking at their passionate audiences, try to cultivate that, own that audience, monetize them in multiple ways in multi-platform sense, which means that real revenue streams are coming in via merchandising, via live events. And the way that they describe it is they're successful if they create brand love. So brand love for like Crunchyroll, whatever it may be. And their definition of brand love is if somebody shows up at a Crunchyroll event wearing a Crunchyroll t-shirt, they know that they have that person, and that person is going to be willing to part with their cash in a very different way than if they're just looking at somebody as being a content provider. So, you know, ultimately, fans or audiences are looking for connection. Some are looking just for entertainment, but to be a very focused, more niche player, you have the opportunity to be more than entertainment. You have an opportunity to be a community, and I think that's the big win.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, a lot of the work we do for media companies is all around the experience, and I think taking a step further than just consuming a piece of content, or even consuming a piece of content then going to expand on that at a live event, is creating that deeper experience with the particular media property, whatever the channel is, and regardless of which one we choose, or maybe we choose multiple, it's all about the experience. And I think to the extent that providers can activate on that theory, those passionate fans will follow. So I think that the idea of the experience as the vehicle for providing the connection is really important.
Elation is actually a great example of, I think, a marvelous approach to this problem of being found, because with their Veve platform, VRV, they have a mixed mode of earning revenue. So they're a freemium service. So each of the SVOD partners that work inside of Veve commit to provide a certain amount of their content free, ad supported. And I think that's a marvelous way of maximizing the revenue that the content providers can earn within the experience. And it solves a lot of problems, right? It's attacking a niche. People in that niche know that they can grab Veve, they can get a whole bunch of free content, they can get their premium content as well, all in one place. It's a great experience. And so I love that. I love that approach, and I hope we see a lot more of that in 2018.
Yeah, that actually brings me into, I think, a natural segue on a few predictions going into 2018, and where I would love for us to go now is to looking at the MVPDs. We're mentioning Fubo. Veve is a perfect example. I was actually going to bring them up as an example of a business that's diversifying. But what's interesting about what Veve is doing and about what some of these virtual MVPDs are trying to do is they are ingesting channels and ingesting brands, and Veve just announced today they've got Drama Fever, they have Crunchyroll, they have Rooster Teeth. But the way that they're approaching that and why it's interesting, and I think a model that we'll see play out in 2018, is because they're also serving as a services provider, a technology provider for those companies as well, in that First can now kind of run everything through Veve, and they can do that independently, or they can do that, inside of Veve. And the rev shares and structure of those deals is so that First is actually incentivized to drive their audience to Veve's platform, and then they kind of algorithmically service a discovery side of that for the consumer. I'm curious though, do you guys see that taking off? I mean, some of the pain points I foresee are just continuing user adoption. I mean, they hit 1 million subscribers in a little bit over a year, so they've had and admittedly, Arlen will say, there's a slow burn for them, it's sort of a slow uptake, but they're still happy with the progress. Do you guys think that that's going to be the new business model of 2018? Is everybody trying to build a virtual MVPD that slices out revenue based on a per sub fee versus a traditional rev share model?
Well, certainly, I mean, one of the things that you talked about, the picks and shovels business, and having the platform and offering that up, it's a good business to be. If you have a strong platform and you're able to white label that, make that available to others, when you have a growing space like this with this mass proliferation of OTT players, that's an interesting part of a business model. And certainly when you were talking about what Outer Media is doing with Elation and with its overall family of offerings, the picks and shovels business is a big part of that, definitely.
Colin, you were smirking as I was saying that. I mean, I don't know if it was an agreement or if you're like, should I challenge her right now? Challenge,
come on, let's get some challenges going.
I hope I wasn't smirking. My goodness, that sounds awful. So I think it was broadly in agreement, Justin. Listen, the biggest problem that the smaller providers have is being found. And banding together in smart bundles like Veve is pushing, I think, is a great way of coming together to float more boats and to increase the opportunity for people to find you. So I think that's a very, very strong model. So I expect to see other people step in and really focus in on larger niche groups with these types of sports, with these types of bundles. So, for example, a great example is outdoors. I could see an outdoors focused bundle that would pull in a whole bunch of properties that make sense for people in that type of group. So,
by the way, I totally agree with you. I love that space. I love the outdoor active space.
Yeah.
I think it's crying for somebody who's a market leader, so I love that opportunity.
Yeah, and you know, there are innumerable others. We're all in one niche or another. But our problem is that finding revenue, finding money in our pocket to spend for so many services is going to be problematic. We will look for reaggregation, people who will pull that together and know how to find us to help us find those types of niche services. So yeah, I think we've seen this sort of a la carte move, this disaggregation, and I think we'll see a coming together again. Somewhat, not anything like the old pay TV big bundle model, but it will be definitely along niches.
Yeah, but I also think go ahead.
No worries. I think from a consumer experience perspective, discovery is really hard right now, and that's a big problem for a lot of these services that are compelling and have their own niche, passionate veins of fans, but others can't find them or don't know they exist, and we see this all of the time in the work that we do, and it's going to help solve that problem when, I think to Colin's point, which I agree with, we see this kind of disaggregation starting to go in reverse and ladder back up into bundling, and that will help, and I think a lot of brands will be better served in that space. Colin, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'll throw in a couple other things. I really think that the on the discovery side, the people who matter to us are going to help us discover some new places to be and to consume and to engage with one another. So those who have strong social followings, the influencers out there, they're going to be leading us, giving us the breadcrumbs that lead us to the services that may matter to us. That's one thing that I absolutely believe, that it's not just about trying to get there and market yourself and differentiate yourself that way, but it's also really bringing in the right kind of influencers under, let's say on the outdoor side, Colin, like you were saying, get the strongest influencers who are in that space, bring them into your stable, and now you have your tent pole of people who can produce your content, engage, sell, all those kinds of things, and that's one way that you're going to be able to draw people into your brand. I also think let's not forget that there are a number of established brands out there that are more traditional brands that are on the print side. I guess, you know, let's take Time Inc. because they just were acquired, and these still have substantial, the brand value itself will serve as a guidepost to us to bring us into new kinds of offerings and new kinds of services. And so that's the big trick, to transform a traditional brand like that into the new world. But at least from a discovery standpoint, established brands still hold value if implemented in the right multi-platform strategy with the right influencers behind them.
Yeah. You know, Jocelyn, you mentioned Zype. I did a project with Zype this year where I went out and talked to some of their clients. And you know, the one thread, there were a couple of threads through these very, very small providers, people like the Film Detective and people like Night Flight. They're providing SVOD services. There is two things that really shone out from these conversations. One was these people are incredibly passionate about the content that they're providing in their services, and two, they use social as their primary mechanism of engaging with their audience, finding subscribers, modifying their service to make it more compelling to them. You know, it's a critical part of their whole service. So we really was a wonderful conversation. Yeah.
Look, social needs to be a fundamental part of every service. It has to be. And certainly I violently agree with you on that, Colin and Jamie, that if you're looking to establish yourself or even grow yourself, it has to be that way. You know, it's not going to be just a marketing spend. A traditional marketing spend model is not going to be effective in the brave new world that we're in.
Yeah, of course. And on the discovery side, I don't know if everybody has heard about this company. One interesting one that we've been tracking is Real Good. It's actually ingesting through the API all of the titles from any platform. They actually they don't have any skin in the game, so whether they can monetize on the long tail has yet to be seen. I question that side for them. And if an acquirer would come along, it probably would wipe out their business because their acquirer probably wouldn't want to have every title ingested into one place. So business model, I question. But in terms of serving up discovery, they're ingesting everything from Netflix to FX to AMC, anything that's available online, they're pulling that in, and then the user can go into Reelgood, find a title based on interest, and then punch out, and it actually goes into the native environment of the streaming platform. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on that one.
I guess I have Josh, I have a question for you on that one. So I think part of the success for something like that, because those kinds of things are tried frequently, is there needs to be some mass and scale and real money behind a company like that. And so I think one of the questions would be, is this just a true startup that has no backing behind it? Or if there's some real players behind it, then I think it has the potential to be interesting.
Yeah, and we've definitely covered their funding, so you can check out their funding on our site. But yes, there's been tons of discovery apps over the years that have tried to make this work, and even social discoveries that take ingest video that's being shared, and they just consistently can't monetize and can't get the audience adoption to be there. One thing I do want to get to very quickly before we jump into brands and advertising, which I think will go pretty quickly in relation to the total arc of our discussion, is what we're thinking on international. International has been a big trend this year. Obviously, Netflix expanding its tentacles globally and starting offices, actual physical locations in many of the countries around the world in their efforts to take over the global audience. We're seeing that replicated in many other streaming businesses as well. But I think also on the production side and the IP owners have really started to rely on international distribution and licensing, given that the U.S. models aren't quite there in terms of monetization yet. So, Colin, I believe you had some particular thoughts on the international side when we pre-talked this, so I'll kick to you first. But.
Yeah. So I think what you're going to see, certainly with the primary brands, people like HBO and Disney, when it finally does launch in 2019 in the US, you're going to see them all really start to look to international markets as engines for growth. We've already seen HBO expand beyond where they'd really only launched in 2 areas. And now they've begun to expand beyond that, heading towards global. Amazon is doing the same thing. So I think this is going to be a big theme coming in the next year. I will say that it creates a real problem for smaller countries because actually what they're finding is they're finding their voice particularly with the young, being decreased. They're getting a lot of their younger people are switching to online and are switching to things like Netflix. And they find it actually very difficult to get their content be seen by their own citizens. So I've been in Scandinavia a couple of times, in Denmark a couple of times, and this is a real problem for them. It will continue to be a problem because I only see it expanding, not contracting. It's a very strong model. If you have a strong brand, then it makes a lot of sense for you to launch that brand in other geographies where that brand is also strong. So, continued growth there for sure with other, particularly US brands.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think brand is everything, and that's the conversation starter when you look to a lot of these providers that are moving internationally. It's they have to lead with the brand, and if the brand doesn't come first, they're going to have a much tougher slog at it internationally, and I think that's going to determine the speed at which a lot of these providers look internationally. So I don't think some are wrong to take their time in doing that, building here first before they go overseas.
And what I think about on the international front, certainly you see the mega players like Amazon they just entered into, I think, 30 more territories, and I'm not sure if everybody in the audience knows that for Netflix entered China, but Netflix didn't enter China with its service. It entered China with its content licensing, really. And so it was a licensing deal. But the way for other non-behemoths, and then you have massive players that we frequently don't talk about nearly enough, like in China where you have Baidu and Alibaba and Tencent. All of them are doing the same things that we're seeing here. Massive amounts of money are being poured into the content development game to own those markets. But the other big trick is go where the other guys aren't, or aren't nearly as effectively. And so, as an example, you see in Southeast Asia, Hook, which is a global partnership with Singtel, with Sony, and with Warner Brothers, and they went there and they put their stakes in the ground, I think 3 years ago now, to establish this international partnership to own that space and really be very content with focusing on emerging markets, starting there and owning there. So now Hook is, I think, also in the Middle East and going where some of the behemoths aren't. And then in some of the individual territories, which still have sizable audiences, focusing on, kind of like we're talking about on the passion side, on the niche side, focusing on being hyper-local, having a more localized experience with a higher, just a different kind of user experience, not one size fits all, and with just much more of the content that's developed with that DNA in mind of the local market. And that's actually playing fairly effectively in some territories in Europe, as an example.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. One area that we've seen a lot be actually problematic for Netflix is that the US studios are now pulling back from licensing the content to them. However, they are not pulling back from licensing internationally. And in fact, I was over in Europe last month, and have been watching CBS All Access to watch the new Star Trek, and guess what I found on Netflix in the UK and basically anywhere outside of the US? A Netflix original called Star Trek Discovery. And I just saw this morning there was news that NBC is licensing content to Netflix outside of the US. So I think whereas the big content providers here in the US are pulling back from working with Netflix and beginning to launch their own services and manage their own online presence, they were not doing that with the international side, where they are less well versed and where Netflix can better monetize the content. So I think that's definitely a trend that we'll continue to see in 2018 too.
By the way, that's another great example, because content being used as a weapon, both offensively and defensively. So another one to that point, Colin, is Disney, which is notoriously now going to be holding back its content, its prized possessions from Netflix and others, by the way, entered into a major distribution agreement with iFlix overseas, which is fascinating. So giving iFlix a better opportunity to compete effectively against Netflix. So working with Netflix's enemy, essentially, to bolster it, to be able to take share. At least that's the goal. So you can see a lot more of that. Content as a weapon.
And the truth is that Netflix has not been competing very well with iFlix in Southeast Asia, Peter. Netflix model just doesn't work very well there. It's too expensive and it targets the big screen. iFlix is much cheaper and targets the small screen, and is having a lot of success in places like Vietnam, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries. So interesting.
I want to be mindful of our time because we do have a lot to cover. So on the brand side, looking at kind of influencers, branded entertainment, that has been a category that obviously has been very strong over the last few years. From my sentiment, it seems that conversation has cooled quite a bit this year. I feel that the focus on influencers has definitely taken an obvious dip. I'm not here to argue that they're not being utilized in campaigns, but I do see that there's been a lot less coverage around influencers being integrated by brands. They've been actually leaning more towards VR and tentpole moments and kind of these experiences versus relying on influencer marketing. But what do you guys see on that side in terms of, and Jamie, I'm going to start with you on this one, given just your area of expertise and work. What do you see on the brand side and how media companies are approaching influencers?
Yeah, I mean, I think my initial thought is that influencer marketing is not dead by any means. I think in terms of any impression delivery mechanism, there's a state of maturation that takes place where folks call into question the effectiveness of that channel per se, and then also and then it takes a pause and we collect our thoughts on the use cases for it and go from there. So I think it's fair to say that there are fewer headlines about it, but I think it's not dead by any means as far as what we see. And I think the notion of connecting the dots between a digital experience, an in-person experience, a linear experience, as I think it was covered earlier, is really where a lot of brands are going. And so what we see is a lot of emphasis on live experiences, not just to capture a live impression of an event or a show or whatever the experience focuses on, but to use that as the driver to create social buzz about the brand that's involved or the property that's involved. So it's not just an experience for an experience's sake, but it's an experience to translate also into the fuel that drives social as well and digital as well. So I think it's the combination of those elements that are really being focused on, and a lot of brands are taking notice and I think are leaning that way in a serious manner, and that's going to really play out, I think, over the next 2 years or so, especially.
An interesting stat that we have again from MarketWired was more than half of teens would choose to advertise their favorite brand with influencers over TV commercials, pre-roll video ads, sponsored articles and posts, or banner ads. What do you guys think that means in terms of the overall digital media spend? I mean, I don't think we're shocked by that sentiment, but what do you guys think that means for the future of media buys, media spending, advertising on that side?
Well, we're seeing it. We're seeing the big hit on the massive global marketing agencies, aren't we? And I haven't checked their stocks lately, but certainly a number of them have had their major hits this past year. I want to touch back just a little bit on Jamie's point, just a couple of things, because a couple of concrete examples where I agree with what everybody said here on this one. I'm sure we'll disagree on some things, but I agree on this too, where while there isn't perhaps as much discussion about branded content in such a headline way, I think part of that is because now it's become such an obvious part of overall monetization. And a couple of cases where there are companies that are doing extremely well with it. 88 Rising, the company I mentioned before, the reason why WPP led the round of financing is because they're able to bring the full muscle on the marketing side, bring it into the content development, and 88 Rising is killing it when it comes to getting involved and doing authentic influencer marketing, I guess you'll call it, but it's just great entertainment. I think Whistle Sports is another one where Whistle Sports has certainly begun to focus more on more influencer and branded content, and they're doing extremely well with that kind of a strategy. So it's just more everyday par for the course. I think Tastemade's another obvious one. And then just in terms of the big picture, I think it's everything we all just, it's clear that the dollars are going where the eyes are, where our habits are, and our internet-driven services, our OTT services, that's increasingly become our #1 destination of choice for our viewing and engagement.
And I think to Josh, to your point earlier, I'll also add to that, Peter, I agree with what you're saying, and I'll also add this, that I don't think influencer marketing and what we now call traditional digital or traditional social, I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive. I think you can, as a brand or as an agency, you can activate each of them hand in hand together. And so I think we're seeing a lot more of that now, and I think there's going to be even more opportunity to do that. And I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive, two different buckets. I think they can go hand in hand, even at the execution level.
Josh, I think that we lost your.
You're muted. You're muted.
Your sound. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on this particular topic in terms of how brands and advertisers are going to be increasing their spend or decreasing? I want to stay off of Facebook a little bit and Google because I know we're going to get to them on our rundown of the majors, but anything else on this side?
I would just say, look, this is one of the things I preach all the time, that if there are any people who are involved in marketing or involved in the brands, this is not going away. This is where the people are, and the pace of this is accelerating. So go out, learn as much as you can, read VideoInk, learn from these people, but experiment. Get out with as many of these services as you can and start experimenting and creating a different way to engage with your audience, because they're not coming back to the traditional ways.
Absolutely. I think on the final topic, actually, I'll just take a quick break. Does anybody have any questions that you would want to shout out? You can just raise your hand very quickly, and I'll just give a quick moment for any questions. Okay, great. So moving on, we're going to do our third topic. I know we're kind of pinched on time, so we're going to keep this one a little bit tight as well. But let's discuss formats very quickly. Obviously, we've seen a lot of focus on the social video format side, a lot of unscripted. Facebook has now made their first bet on a scripted project with Indigenous, and we're kind of seeing that whole model of focusing on original formatting and original content play out in a very, I think, unexpected way, where with people who were kind of excited about Go90 and YouTube Red and even Spotify doing a lot of upfront spending for content, now having backed off quite a bit on that spend. What do you guys think in terms of that content mix going into, or even just trends from this year and going into next year?
Well, it certainly doesn't look like the big providers like Amazon and Netflix are backing off spending anytime soon. I think we probably won't see anybody spending anywhere near that much. I know we're going to get to Apple in a bit, but I think they've committed a much smaller amount, maybe $1 billion. Yeah. That's going to be challenging, I think, for anybody else to be able to jump in and make a meaningful impact with originals in that space. I mean, you mentioned specifically YouTube Red. They've spent money, and they really haven't had a breakout hit. One of the problems, of course, there is it's such a crowded space now. There's so much great content online. It's really difficult to establish yourself with an audience. And get the sort of
on television, right? Because now they're sort of competing side by side. So much good stuff on television and online.
That's right, and of course both YouTube and Facebook now are moving on to the television, the connected television. So that's going to be a big space for them next year. They're both going to be putting a lot of focus on that because of course that's where they're going to get the engagement. And when you're driven by ads as they are, then getting engagement is the key thing. And we are seeing big growth, and I expect to see continued big growth in connected television next year. So that trajectory seems to be set. Consumers are very happy and comfortable watching on a connected TV. So that probably bodes pretty well, particularly for YouTube, which already has a strong force in connected TV. Much more difficult for Facebook and Watchable. That's on Watch rather. That's going to be very difficult for them because they just don't have the footprint there, and they will need some really good content, I think, to get people on that platform. So to be seen if the amount of money that they're willing to commit will be enough to create a big hit to get people there and get people watching on TV.
I'll give you a couple from a few trends to look out for. First, this flows from what we have talked about a little bit before. If you are looking more at a niche demographic or smaller pie-focused audience, then getting the influencers that you need, so trying to find those who have deep social followings and then funding them in a way to create stories that are at a level that they haven't been able to before, that's a smart way and we will see more of that. We're bringing those kind of creators in and helping them to create and cost-effectively create, giving them but more resources. I think some other things, when you look at some of the things that, like, I'll give an example with CryptTV. So CryptTV is a horror-driven OTT service, and what they do really effectively is that they create characters and short stories that they then test constantly. What holds, and they can do this extremely cost effectively from a development standpoint, and they're constantly testing, and they see what sticks very cost effectively, and then they can build from there, longer, more deep productions, invest in it more, and that's a recipe that we're going to be seeing much more. And I'll give you a couple examples of companies that are doing it interestingly in that respect. Madefire, which is motion books, has a similar kind of strategy where they cost-effectively develop comic-driven content, see what sticks, and then they ultimately can take it upstream to more theatrical distribution and a very different monetization. I also think that there's some services that are more text-based that are doing similar things, where you start small with serial stories, and then Yarn is one of them. And then what hits and build on that. And then one other theme, so I think that's one theme, where there's going to be much more efficient ways to see what resonates with an audience, and then investing more and more into that, which ultimately leads to the big promise of a 360-degree holistic view of storytelling, where you see a property, maybe a central character, and you can take it all the way from the, from the mobile device into more traditional platforms, into the offline plank, so live events, and then offline, online fueling each other. That, to me, that's a massive opportunity. And interestingly enough, I think Amazon's already doing a lot of that. And to me, one of the most intriguing, if not the most intriguing, digital media company of the year.
Great.
Yeah,
Gimlet Media is also, on that point, Gimlet Media is also one that's doing that very interestingly, and the podcast storytelling is really taking off, and Chris Giliberti over at Gimlet is really leading on developing out programming based on their most successful formats. They already have one locked up with Amazon called Homecoming that will release in 2018. So yeah, I agree with that trend.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think a lot has been said recently around creating snackable content, and I think there's a very binary dynamic happening right now where if everything needs to be so snackable, why are we seeing more and more longer form content? So I think that's going to be surprising to a lot of people over the next few years. The fact that so much long form is coming out in light of all of the noise around everything being short and attention spans being short. I think it's going to be very, very surprising to a lot of people how much long form is going to come out and how much long form sticks. And I think Gimlet, others are good examples of that.
I think though, yeah, but just really quickly on that point, again, don't disagree, but I don't think it's one or the other. The big win is if you can take it all the way across all the ways that you can engage with the customer. So there can be certain formats that are going to more effectively be on the mobile side. I hate to use short or long form because it's just what storytelling works in that. But there will be content for all of it, and it's a question of who's going to be able to effectively tell the story for it. But if somebody can crack the code of taking it all the way 360, that's the big win, and Amazon is trying.
Yeah. One quick comment about originals. They are not a panacea. Even when you have a hit with your audience, it may not save you. So remember what happened to CISO, and Harmon Quest was pretty successful, and they had a couple of other hits there. The problem with CISO, of course, is they just didn't have the other content to back it up, so they just couldn't get people to subscribe. So great originals isn't the only thing you need when you're providing service.
Oh man, Colin, we should just do a dissection of CISO's business model together on a whole separate session. I think we could probably have a lot of fun with that one. That
would certainly be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna take us to our final bit. We definitely are gonna run over a few minutes. So for those of you who are not able to stay on, we are recording the session, so we'll make that available to everybody after the call. For those of you who will stay on, I would anticipate that we're probably going to hit somewhere around 5 to 10 minutes behind schedule, probably closer to 10, just because we're going to try to get through 10 of the big companies right now. So this one is going to be really rapid fire. I really want you to focus on high-level thoughts on each company. We're just going to go around the circle. We'll go clockwise and we'll go counterclockwise. I'll call you out. We'll get a little playful with it. And these are in no particular order. I guess now that I'm looking at it, I did sort of group them by category, but they're not intended to be based on favor or anything along those lines. First one is Facebook. Peter, let's start there.
Facebook is one of the most exciting, I would say, digital media companies of the past year. I love the bets that they've made in the overall space. Went all in when it came to video engagement, 2 years ago now, in 2016, and then in 2017 going into watch so heavily. Ultimately, their vision, of course, is to not fund it all themselves, but to build the environment. So whether they're going to succeed, I don't know, but certainly they have the platform to be able to do it, the resources to be able to do it, formidable, and yes, I think that a lot of people should be nervous.
Jamie?
Data. Facebook has an enormous amount of data. There have been a few headlines recently around how they're choosing to work with the data and how that affects advertisers and brands and media companies. But I think the power in Facebook is the inherent data that they have about their users, more data than we even realize. And so that, to me, especially coming from the research world, is the most top of mind thought and what will power Facebook going forward.
Yep.
Yep, that's it. Go ahead.
Facebook needs to keep growing. One of the areas that they are looking to continue to grow ad revenue is television. And if they want to attract some of that $70 billion that's being spent on TV advertising every year in the US, they need Watch to be a success. And that is going to be a challenge. They're going to need to spend real money on a lot of originals to get people on Watch on TV to attract that TV money.
Yep, my high level on Facebook is that they're going to be doing a lot of user experience changes over the next year on Watch. It's very clear which content is going into Spotlight. I mean, obviously they have that section broken out, but the way they're even discussing those deals with creators, funding them with a little bit less upfront, but offering them more prominent placement inside of Watch, I think is going to play out very interestingly for the production side of it, for the actual people who get those deals and how they start to structure the deal making in terms of placement and actual marketing and getting into the algorithm in a certain way there. Because if just you look across our chart tracking the shows, you can definitely see who is being favored and who is not based on episode by episode. So I think that's one interesting thing. I think in terms of the TV dollars side, what's going to be interesting is them building out their social environment around the video and very acutely paying attention to Zuckerberg's words about how they do not want to be funding up front for very long. They really want to be, front-ending the flywheel and getting people used to the behavior of going to the Watch section and then empowering creators. I think that's a very tricky model to go, so I would anticipate that will change probably mid next year. You'll hear Zuck saying very different approach to their video, but Zuck, my friend Zuck, no, I'm just teasing. I just didn't want to say Zuckerberg, Peter, just let it go. Okay, next one. YouTube and Google. Let's start with Colin.
So YouTube has some big challenges in the coming year. They have both Amazon and Facebook chasing after their revenue. They've had two big screw-ups this year, two apocalypses. They can't afford to have that happen anymore because the advertisers will just stop trusting them, and if that happens, that could be disastrous. And as I say, Amazon and Facebook both have great deals now for creators and platforms where they can begin to reach their audiences. So they can't afford, YouTube cannot afford any more screw-ups.
Yep. Go ahead, Jamie.
YouTube, I think look to them to change the way that they interact with their creators. I think that's something to look for in the next couple of years. Maybe not drastically, and maybe some changes that we might, as outsiders, not be aware of. But I think that, to Colin's point, I think that might we might see some changes as far as how that relationship goes.
Peter.
Yeah, the biggest issue that YouTube has is its brand, and it's been so long established. We've always believed that it's this free service, and it has a certain type of content associated with it. And so from the very beginning, when YouTube tried to get into more premium services, this is the big problem that it has: how to change the way that we perceive those services to be. It's a tough one. It's a tough challenge for them to do.
I'm going to come back to something that was I'm going to echo something that was said earlier about the element of the hits. I just think, and I'm going to bring this up in a minute when we get to Netflix, but I do think that there's going to need to be a hit that comes out of any of these aspiring streamers. And I still think YouTube's aspiring because they're still trying to get the television dollars, and the nature of the deals that they're doing, locking up sports rights, and Colin, that's one thing we didn't get to. I hope we'll get to it
We didn't,
towards the end. the locking up sports rights, trying to go for the skinny bundle. I think they're just doing a lot of testing to figure out what where their actual big win or what their version of a big hit's going to be next year. So if they can get one. I'm going to switch around. I have, let's do Amazon and Twitch next. And Jamie, I'm going to start with you. I'm just going to keep going around.
I mean, Peter, I think you hit on Amazon throughout, and I mean, I agree. I think they take and will be taking the idea of experience to a whole nother level. Not just content consumption, but consumption of goods and services, and they are, I think, by far the furthest along in that conversation, and the ability to tie those two pieces together is what marketers and brands have been looking for a long time, and it will be very interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, so I mean, I think that's by far the most top of mind thought for me as far as Amazon goes.
Peter?
Amazon, my #1 most fearless digital media company of the year. If people aren't following that company so closely and thinking of it as a media company, then they should be. And the most important part about Amazon, two things. Jamie, you were talking about data. Think about the data that Amazon has. They know exactly what we shop, exactly what we watch, how we spend our money, what we're looking to buy. That's very powerful. Who can match that from a data perspective? I don't know of any company that can match the power of that data. And so from a programming standpoint and from a monetization standpoint, ultimately, that's fascinating. And ultimately, it is for them driving Prime membership. That's where their fundamental business model is. But I think Amazon is just, it's that piece, the data piece, and the fact that it's everywhere that they want to be, in-home, out-home. They bought Whole Foods. They view their movies in movie theaters, unlike Netflix, and they're in the malls now while others are tearing down their bookstores. They're building them up, and it's all to cross-pollinate everything that they have. Powerful.
I'm going to go next on this one, and then I'm going to end on you, Colin. So I'm not actually as, not that I'm not interested in Amazon, but I don't have as many big opinions about their entire ecosystem in terms of the commerce side. What's interesting to me about Amazon is twofold. It's the Amazon Video Direct side and sort of their services side, where they're working with creators. Right now they're doing a very stealth outreach to creators. I mean, maybe not so stealth, but they're not publicizing it really. I think that's interesting. I think the other side is some of their owned and operated brands that really don't get talked about as much, like IMDb is actually moving back into originals. They're doing some tests with various companies on unscripted formats and seeing how IMDb can move into video. I think we do talk a lot about Twitch, but the conversation there is still heavily around gaming, and one of the big trends I'm looking at emerging this year and going into next year is really Twitch's role in turning on linear channels with a number of the more successful digital media companies and allowing them to repurpose their library of content and try to find monetization in that ecosystem. So those are the things that I'm watching on Amazon and Twitch. Go ahead, Colin. Bring us home on this one.
I really don't know where to start, to be honest. It is a model we have never seen in media before. A model that's backed up by retail. Amazon is first and foremost a retailer. Everything they do is driven by that. A channels model is unmatched yet. Veve is using a very similar model, but to a much smaller audience. This is a tremendously powerful model. They have, I think, the balance right between creating original content and working with partners. And as Bezos says, he's got that flywheel running. He can afford to pay more for content because he sells more ski boots because of it. So it's very difficult to fault them. If there is any fault I can find with their strategy or with their delivery, I don't find the experience on Amazon to be very friendly. I think they need to do a lot to improve the experience, but boy, you better be watching them, particularly if you're a pay TV operator in 2018.
Mm-hmm. Let's go to another biggie, Netflix. Go ahead, Peter.
We talked about this before. Netflix, we all watch it. We all pay the money for it. We all do that. But I'm I'm somewhat of a contrarian on this one, where Netflix is continue to grow, but as the pie shifts or the pie expands massively, which it will globally, its share of the pie will decrease, which is, that alone is not a bad thing, and that's inevitable. But ultimately, it's the business model. So for Netflix, they're I hate to minimize it this way, one-trick pony. All they do is that they sell the subscription services and they monetize the content only. When we're talking about Amazon, when we're talking about AT&T or Google and with YouTube and Apple with its inevitable SVOD service that's going to be coming out, they can monetize. Ultimately, their service is just marketing. Ultimately, it's marketing to bring us in so that we do shop, so that we do buy, and we sign up for Prime memberships. And so these companies, those behemoths, have this powerful business model that a Netflix can never match. So I think ultimately, I'm a believer that Netflix will be acquired by some even larger behemoth than it is. I just don't see the economics penciling out long term.
Colin?
I don't see the acquisition taking place in 2018, Peter. I think we'll continue to see modest growth in the US and strong growth in international markets. They are very adept at using their data to figure out the right content to produce, to get audiences watching and keep them watching. Their strategy is very simple. They want to be an anchor tenant in people's entertainment bundles, their personal bundles, and they're doing a pretty good job on executing on that right now, and I see more of the same in 2018.
By the way, just really quickly on that, I agree. I didn't say 2018. I think long-term business model challenge.
Okay.
But they will be bought.
Possibly.
My favorite. Definitely. Jamie, bring us home with your any final thoughts. I'm gonna skip this one just because in light of time.
Sure. So Netflix.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Netflix. What I'm most interested in is the data that will end up hitting the marketplace as far as consumption on Netflix. I think 2017 proved to be the beginning of that conversation in an actually meaningful way, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else Netflix and the kind of the industry overall is going to agree upon as the data or consumption that will end up being released to the marketplace. And so that I'm curious. I want to see what'll happen next in that thread.
Yep. Okay, moving on. Let's do. We're going to speed it up, see if we can. I know we're going to spend a little time on these. Let's do Apple next, since that's the big one.
Want me to go first?
Sure. Go ahead, Colin.
A big yawn for 2018.
Yawn.
Yep. They're not executing. They're not focused there. They're going to continue to do pretty much nothing.
Okay, so Colin and I are starting as we get in. Maybe it's because I'm getting tired, but I disagree. I think Apple will not have a big yawn. In fact, Apple, it's inevitable that they will have some major announcement in this space. Let's look what they did on the music side. Music. They waited too long. The other services got the Spotify and Pandora's got far ahead of it. They tried to launch their own service. Ultimately, they had to buy their way into the world of streaming. But they did because Amazon, it's not in their, or excuse me, Apple, it's not in their DNA to sit on the sidelines. They will enter the game, whether they acquire their way into the game or they will launch their own SVOD service in 2018.
I sit right squarely in the middle of you guys. Maybe that's because I'm the diplomatic one, or I just like to see all sides. I think they're going to continue to put the infrastructure in place, lock up their studio space in Culver City is where they're looking right now. I think they're going to lock up that space, fill that out with the infrastructure. I think they'll do a lot of hiring there. I think we'll still continue to see little tests and little acquisitions, but I don't think they're going to put that $1 billion to hard work, at least from what we'll see in 2018. I think we'll see that really play out probably closer to 2019 if they do actually end up going that route with building out a big programming slate versus going and staying on their TVOD licensing library side.
By the way, just one thing on Apple. If you look at, if past is prologue, a very likely path could be buying their way into the game with somebody who already has the full platform and who has some interesting content. So that's one possibility.
So you're hinting at what maybe a Netflix acquisition? We've heard that rumor a lot.
Yes, we have, and rumors have a tendency to come true ultimately when they're very logical. So I could see it happening. I don't expect it I don't expect that one in 2018, but it wouldn't surprise me either. Yeah, they're a natural buyer.
Yeah, I think historically Apple's been very thoughtful and very very calculated in the moves that they make, whether it's building internally or M&A. And so I don't know if next year there will be a massive inflection point, but I think behind the scenes, of course, they're thinking about this space, whether it's video, audio, all of the above, and I think over maybe the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, I think we'll see them move in that direction, kind of at a calculated pace.
On Hulu, we're going to go to Hulu very quickly. My thoughts on Hulu are just that they're going to continue to try to knock down their next Handmaid's Tale. And obviously the Disney Fox acquisition, that will play out, I think, in a very interesting way for Hulu, and in relation to all the IP that will be inherited through that process or become available through Hulu on that process, and vice versa. But for now, I think that they're going to continue to try and track after a big tentpole project and continue to activate the living room in a way that they had. I'll be interested to see how their transactional VOD or their transactional element plays out in the environment with selling tickets, and seeing if they can kind of move the needle on that side with brands and partners. But for the most part, I think they're just going to track after another big hit.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Hulu, I appreciate what they've been trying from an innovation perspective, and they're doing a lot in advanced TV, and that group is doing really interesting things. So I think, yes, they're going to try to build out the original and follow the big tentpoles from a content perspective, but I think behind the scenes they're doing a lot in the advanced TV space that might be interesting over the next maybe 1 to 2 years, as far as how they interface with advertisers.
I also think on Hulu. Well, go ahead, Colin.
No, Peter, go ahead. You naturally went into it, so go for it.
Go for it.
So for Hulu, who's already they're a distant third, at least in the States, but if the Disney Fox deal happens, which it certainly seems like it's going to happen now from the recent developments, then it's a different ballgame, because now you have the opportunity for a Disney-controlled entity to be able to be marketed across this massive Disney family, and so that's some real reach that Hulu doesn't have on its own. I think that's interesting, and Disney can potentially Disneyfy it a little bit more by bringing in its service or its prize content and using that as marquee stuff as it tries to compete more effectively with the Netflixes. So I think that Disney deal with Fox is very interesting.
Yeah, Hulu is probably the best experience of all of the virtual MVPDs. The integration between the Hulu SVOD service and the live service is super, and I think they'll continue to build on that going forward. Yeah, it's possible if Disney does end up in control, it could be both a good thing and a bad thing for the platform. But 13 million subscribers is a great place to start from. So we'll continue. Whatever happens, we'll continue to see Hulu consolidate its position in the market next year.
Let's go on the final two, and I'm going to loop them in on one because they're definitely related. One of them might actually give you an opportunity, you and I, Colin, an opportunity to talk on sports a bit, given the big deal that was announced this week and anticipated well in advance of that. But Verizon and AT&T, two telcos, kind of like the two leaders in the streaming space. I'm up for whoever wants to start on this one, AT&T and or Verizon.
So one of the things that I think Verizon and AT&T are both doing is they're looking to TV content to help build and solidify their wireless business. They are looking at the content in exactly the same way that pay TV operators look at triple bundle pricing and plans to reduce churn and I think that's a huge win for both companies. One of the things I think we'll probably see from Verizon this year is something like a DirecTV Now in 2018. I mean, we'll see that sort of approach for them as well. They will continue to use TV content to help solidify their existing subscriber bases in wireless, and hopefully steal from some of the smaller providers. So that's definitely going to happen this year.
You're muted, but I think you were asking for me. So this is one, Colin, we're back in agreement on this one, because absolutely, it's about the bundle, it's about convenience, it's about pricing, and getting enough of a compelling array of services or content to bring us in and keep us there. So I completely agree with everything that Colin said on that one.
Yeah, I'm with.
And frequently throughout the conversation.
Yeah, I think that there's you know, and I keep harping on this, but I think there's new data here. I'm really interested to see what happens with that. I think we got a little bit of a taste for that with Comcast and NBCU from a set-top box perspective, and now I'm interested in seeing you know, how that plays out when you fold in wireless and you fold in the service provider angle into content. So I think just I love the data integration of it all.
Yeah, for me on my side, I'm perplexed by Verizon's lack of momentum on the Go90 side. I've heard that they're also going to be ingesting a whole new video unit underneath the Oath brand, which Go90 is under, and that will have a separate selling team than that Go90 team does. They've obviously got complex networks. They've got the investment in Awesomeness TV. They've got the 2 incubated brands in partnership with Hearst, Rated Red and Seriously, which really folded up under Complex. I don't think we've seen any of that fully realized over the last year. They've sort of gone into a quiet hole. Renewals are starting to pick up. I think we'll see that next year. But again, across all of these, I think really what's going to be an important moment for the industry is when one of them has a breakout hit and an actual title that moves into the cultural zeitgeist in the way that Handmaid's Tale has, or in the way that Transparence did, or in the way that House of Cards did, or you can name a number of those across those 3 big streamers. I think that Go90 and Facebook and YouTube would all really be anxious to have in 2018.
Well, and that's why the AT&T Time Warner deal is so important, because there you go.
Yep. And the other side on the Verizon piece, just to bring that back, is that on the sports side, I think that'll continue to be just a strong area for them in terms of bringing all of that home and under the fold, and bringing all of their audiences across those brands I mentioned before into a relationship with the sports audience that they're pulling in through the live games and the live rights that they've just locked up once again. Since I'm the one talking, I'll go in on quickly. I have some thoughts on AT&T as well. I'm obviously excited about the Time Warner deal. I think their investment in Otter 3 years ago, or investment with Chernin Group in Otter 3 years ago, was a really interesting move that I think we're seeing playing out now, and definitely with the Time Warner acquisition, especially in the learnings that they've gleaned from Fullscreen, from Veve, from Elation, from the brands that they've acquired underneath the Otter brand, even some of the other brands. I'm drawing a blank right now on the Reese Witherspoon brand that they have. It's Miss Sunshine something or other. But I think all of that is really going to start to feed into AT&T's strategy and AT&T's Entertainment Group's strategy going into 2018. Already this year, we've seen them quietly, but not so quietly, putting out their own branded titles and their own original, quote-unquote, original projects that they've acquired and been distributing. You've seen billboards for those all across Los Angeles and the major cities. So I think that's them quietly testing out what's going to work for them and what's not going to work for them in 2018. I think we'll see them start to do a lot more buying and acquisitions of content in the new year. Anyone else have thoughts on AT&T?
Well,
I think
not beyond.
Not the deal. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Colin.
No, not beyond. I mean, I think DirecTV Now, that strategy has been pretty successful for both DirecTV Now and for AT&T, the broader AT&T company. Whether or not they actually do close the Time Warner deal, well, that's going to be in litigation all next year, so we probably won't get to know the answer to that until the end of the year. If they do prevail and they do end up getting that content, you can bet that there'll be aggressive bundles with their wireless plans with that as well. So DirecTV Now should be an interesting year for them if they can actually deliver a pretty reliable NDVR service that's in beta right now. If they do, then you could see that service grow even faster than it's growing right now, and it is the fastest growing virtual MVPD in the market right now. So.
Great. I think that brought us all the way to the end. There are a few others that I wanted to cover, but we're so over time. I want to be mindful of everyone's schedules. We actually did not have really anybody drop off, so that's actually just shows how engaging and insightful you guys were, so thank you to you for that. If anyone has questions, you can feel free to send those to me at JJ@VideoInk. I'll make sure that the panelists or one of us is available to answer them, and there's also a recording of this that will be made available to everybody within the next 48 hours. So without further ado, thank you guys, and thank you everybody for listening. I'm going to go ahead and end our broadcast now.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Josh. See you guys.
Thank you.